1 year after my husband's death, I hired a company to renovate his old office. I had just arrived at the church when the contractor called me and said, "Ma'am, I need you to come see what we found. But don't come alone. Bring your 2 sons." My heart nearly stopped when we arrived. "Don't forget to follow and comment where you're watching from." The phone call came during the closing hymn. I should have silenced it before the service began, but at 63 years old, I still sometimes forgot these small courtesies of modern life. The vibration against my palm felt insistent, urgent. I glanced down at the screen. Morgan, renovation. My stomach tightened. Morgan Holbrook never called unless something was wrong. I slipped from the pew as quietly as I could manage, my joints protesting after an hour of sitting. The late September air outside St. Cy. Andrews felt crisp against my face as I pressed the phone to my ear. "Mrs. Golding, I'm sorry to interrupt your Sunday," Morgan began, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before, "but we found something in your husband's office. Something you need to see immediately." "What kind of something?" I asked, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his words were measured. "Careful. I can't explain it over the phone, but ma'am, I need you to bring your sons with you. Both of them. Don't come alone?" The line went dead. I stood there on the church steps, staring at my phone as the bells began to toll. Don't come alone. What could possibly require both Michael and Dale to be present? What could a contractor find that would necessitate such a warning? My hands trembled as I dialed Michael's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice heavy with the lazy contentment of a Sunday morning. "Mom, I'm in the middle of breakfast with Claire and the kids. Michael, I need you at the house now." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Bring Dale. What's wrong?" "The renovation crew found something. The contractor says, we all need to be there." I heard him cover the phone, muffled conversation in the background. Claire's voice rose sharply. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Irritation, inconvenience. "Mom, can't this wait until he said not to come alone?" "Michael, he said to bring both of you." Another pause. "Wunk'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Falls, Virginia, my mind racing through possibilities. Thomas had been gone for a year now, 1 full rotation of seasons without his steady presence beside me. The heart attack had been sudden, merciless. One moment he'd been working in his study, preparing for a deposition. The next, he was gone. His office had remained untouched since that January morning. I couldn't bring myself to enter it, to face the absence that filled every corner of that room. But 3 weeks ago, on what would have been our 42nd anniversary, I'd made a decision. I would transform that space into something new. Not erase Thomas. I could never do that. But create something forward-looking. A library, perhaps. A place where our grandchildren could read. The renovation had begun 5 days ago. They'd started with the bookshelves, carefully removing Thomas's law volumes, and boxing them for storage, then the carpet, the old wallpaper. Morgan had promised it would take 3 weeks, maybe 4. They'd been scheduled to open up the wall behind Thomas's desk today. Something about updating the electrical wiring before installing the new built-in shelving. As I turned onto Hawthorne Drive, I saw both my sons' cars already parked in the driveway. Michael's sleek BMW sat next to Dale's more modest Honda. They stood together near the front porch, and even from a distance, I could see the tension in their postures. They'd barely spoken to each other since Thomas's funeral. Some argument over the estate that I'd tried desperately to stay out of. "Mom," Michael called as I climbed out of my car. He strode toward me, all business in his pressed slacks and polo shirt. At 41, he'd inherited his father's sharp features and sharper mind. "What's this about?" "I don't know any more than you do," I said, fishing my keys from my purse. Dale hung back, hands shoved in the pockets of his worn jeans. At 37, he'd always been the gentler of my 2 boys, more interested in his high school teaching position than in following his father and brother into law. But there was something guarded in his expression now, something watchful. The front door opened before I could use my key. Morgan stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath his tan. Sawdust clung to his flannel shirt. "Mrs. Golding, thank you for coming so quickly." His eyes darted to my sons. "Both of you. What did you find?" Michael demanded, already moving past him into the house. Morgan looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Pity. And underneath it, something else. Fear. It's better if you see it yourselves, he said quietly. We followed him through the familiar hallway to Thomas's study. The room looked strange, violated, stripped of carpet and wallpaper, the bones of the house exposed. Two of Morgan's crew stood near the far wall, their faces carefully neutral. The wall behind where Thomas's desk had stood for 2 decades was gone, not just opened, completely removed. In its place was a space I'd never known existed, a hidden room. It was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, lit now by work lights that Morgan's crew had brought in. The walls were bare drywall, never painted, and along those walls were shelves, dozens of them filled with files. The wall was false, Morgan explained, his voice tight. Double-layered. We found the seam when we were checking for studs. There's a door mechanism here. He pointed to what looked like an innocuous section of bookshelf hidden behind the trim work. Your husband built this years ago by the look of it. Professional job. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The files were labeled, organized with the same meticulous care Thomas had brought to everything in his professional life. I recognized his handwriting on the tabs, but it was the contents that made my breath catch. Photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and names. So many names written in Thomas's precise script across manila folders. Michael pushed past me, grabbing one of the files. His face went white as he opened it. What the hell is this? He breathed. I pulled another file from the shelf at random. Inside were photographs of a man I didn't recognize. Copies of financial documents, what looked like surveillance notes dated over a decade ago. At the top of the page, in Thomas's handwriting, subject Richard Petton. Status terminated. Terminated. My hands shook as I set the file down and reached for another and another. Each one contained a dossier on someone. Most of them people I'd never heard of. But some names I recognized. Local business owners, a former mayor, the superintendent of schools. Mom. Dale's voice was strangled. He stood in the corner of the hidden room holding a file that bore no name on the tab, just a date. June 1998. He opened it and photographs spilled out onto the floor. I bent to gather them, and my world tilted on its axis. The photos showed a young woman, beautiful, dark-haired, entering and leaving a hotel. In some of them, she was with a man, not just any man, my husband. There were receipts, hotel bills, restaurant charges, all dated across a span of 6 months in 1998. The year Michael had graduated from college. The year we'd celebrated. Our 25th wedding anniversary with a party at the country club. The year Thomas had told me he was traveling constantly for a case in Richmond. There's more, Morgan said quietly. He pointed to the back of the hidden room, where a small safe was embedded in the wall. We haven't opened it. We didn't think we should. Michael was already across the room examining the safe. It's a digital lock, 4 digits. Mom, do you know Dad's codes? I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The photographs felt like weights in my hands. Who was this woman? Why had Thomas kept these records hidden for over 2 decades? And more terrifyingly, what else had my husband been hiding? Try the anniversary, Dale suggested, his voice hollow. Michael punched in numbers. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside was a single leather-bound journal and a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled with dates spanning back 30 years. But it was what sat on top that made Michael step backward, his face ashen, a handgun. And beneath it, a passport with Thomas's photo. But a different name. Mom, Michael said slowly, turning to face me. What kind of law was Dad really practicing? I looked around the hidden room, at the files covering the walls, at the evidence of a life I'd never known my husband had lived. Thomas Golding, the man who'd kissed me goodbye every morning, who'd sat across from me at dinner every night. For 4 decades, who'd held my hand through 2 pregnancies and 1,000 ordinary days, had been a stranger. A stranger with secrets that someone had wanted to keep buried. Because as Morgan had led us through the house, I'd noticed something. Small things that might have meant nothing individually, but together formed a pattern. The scratches around the front door lock that hadn't been there last week. The faint smell of cigarette smoke in the hallway, though no one in my family smoked. The way the alarm code had failed to work when I'd arrived 3 days ago, I'd assumed it was a glitch. But now, standing in this hidden room filled with evidence of Thomas's secret life, I understood. Someone else knew about this room. Someone who'd been searching for something, and they might be searching still. "We need to call the police," Dale said. But Michael shook his head, his lawyer's mind already working. "And tell them what that dad had a hidden room. That's not illegal. The gun probably is. Virginia requires registration. But that's not exactly Michael." I cut him off, my voice firmer than I felt. "Look at these files. Really look at them. What do you see?" He pulled another folder from the shelf at random, opened it. His eyes scanned the contents. And I watched comprehension dawn. "These are blackmail files," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "And if your father was keeping them, if he'd hidden them this carefully for this long, there's a reason." "What reason?" Dale demanded. "What could possibly justify?" The sound of footsteps on the porch stopped him mid-sentence. We all froze. A knock at the door, sharp, authoritative. Morgan moved to the window, peered out, and went even paler. "There's a sheriff's cruiser in your driveway." My heart stopped. "I didn't call them." "Neither did we," Michael said. Another knock, more insistent. A voice called through the door. "Mrs. Golding, this is Deputy Marshal Garrett. I need to speak with you about your husband's estate." "Deputy Marshal? Not local police. Federal." I looked at my sons, saw my own fear reflected in their faces. Whatever Thomas had been involved in, whatever secrets he'd kept hidden behind that false wall, they'd just found us. And I had no idea what we'd done to put ourselves in danger or how to protect my family from what was coming. The marshal knocked again, waiting. Time seemed to freeze in that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of a life I'd never known, holding photographs of my husband with another woman, while a federal officer stood at my door asking questions I had no answers for. I took a deep breath and started toward the hallway. Behind me, Michael grabbed my arm. "Mom, wait. We need to think about this." But I'd already made my decision. Whatever Thomas had done, whatever he'd been hiding, I would face it. I'd spent a year grieving a man I thought I knew. Now it was time to discover who he'd really been, even if the truth destroyed everything I'd believed about my life. Deputy Marshal Robert Garrett was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 50, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He stood on my porch with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to waiting, his badge displayed prominently on his belt. "Mrs. Golding, I apologize for the Sunday intrusion," he said, his Virginia drawl softening the formality. "I'm following up on some irregularities related to your late husband's estate filing. May I come in?" Behind me, I felt Michael tense. Dale had gone silent. Morgan and his crew were still in the house, witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. My voice sounded remarkably calm, considering my heart was attempting to break through my ribcage. "Though I'm not sure what irregularities you're referring to. Everything was handled by my husband's law partner, Edward Hutchkins." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes at the mention of Edward's name. "Yes, ma'am. That's actually part of what I need to discuss with you." He followed me into the living room, noting the renovation chaos with a sweep of his gaze. His eyes lingered on the open doorway to Thomas's study, and I saw recognition there. He knew about the hidden room, or suspected. "Marshal?" Michael stepped forward, extending his hand with the practiced ease of a corporate attorney. "I'm Michael Golding, Mrs. Golding's eldest son. Perhaps you could explain the nature of this visit." Garrett shook his hand, assessed him with a glance. "I'm investigating potential financial crimes related to several estates managed by the Golding and Hutchkins law firm over the past 15 years. The words fell like stones into still water. "My father's firm." Michael's voice sharpened. "That's impossible. Golding and Hutchkins has an impeccable reputation," had Garrett corrected quietly. "Edward Hutchkins disappeared 3 days ago, cleaned out the firm's trust, accounts, approximately $2.3 million, and vanished. We've issued a federal warrant." The room spun. I gripped the arm of the sofa to steady myself. Edward Hutchkins had been Thomas's partner for 30 years. He'd been a pallbearer at the funeral. He'd helped me navigate the estate paperwork, had assured me everything was in order. "When you say disappeared," Dale asked slowly, "do you mean his wife came home Thursday evening to find his clothes gone, his computer wiped, and a note saying he was sorry?" Garrett pulled out a small notebook. "Mrs. Golding, When did you last speak with Mr. Hutchkins? I struggled to remember. 3 weeks ago when I signed the papers to authorize this renovation. He came here to the house. Did he seem agitated, worried? I thought back to that afternoon. Edward had been his usual self, professional, sympathetic, perhaps a bit distracted, but there had been something. He asked about Thomas's office, whether I'd found anything unusual among his papers. Garrett's eyes sharpened. And, had you? Michael shot me a warning glance, but I was tired of secrets, tired of lies. No, I hadn't been in the office since Thomas died. Not until the renovation began. It was technically true. I hadn't found anything. The contractors had Mrs. Golding. I need to ask you something directly. Garrett leaned forward, his expression grave. Did you know your husband maintained files on various individuals, personal information, financial records, the kind of documentation that might be considered blackmail material? Michael interrupted coldly. Marshall, I think before my mother answers any more questions, we should establish whether she needs legal representation. I'm not investigating your mother, Garrett said. But I am investigating what your father and Edward Hutchkins were doing with those files and why Hutchkins ran the moment he heard about this renovation. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrible clarity. He knew about the hidden room. We believe so. Yes. We also believe he was afraid of what might be found there. Garrett walked to the window overlooking the backyard. Mrs. Golding, your husband was a brilliant attorney. He also kept meticulous records of information that certain people would prefer stayed buried. We think Hutchkins was helping him manage that information. And when your husband died, someone else wanted those files. I finished. Garrett nodded. We think Edward was being pressured, possibly threatened. And rather than face what was coming, he took the money and ran. Leaving my mother to face the consequences, Michael said bitterly. Leaving all of us to face them, Dale corrected. He'd been quiet until now, but his face was ashen. If Dad was blackmailing people, we don't know that's what he was doing, I said sharply. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they rang hollow. What else could those files be? Garrett turned back to face us. I need to see that room. Whatever your husband was hiding, it may be evidence in a federal investigation, and it may also help us locate Edward Hutchkins before he stopped. Before what? I demanded. Before whoever he's running from catches up to him. A chill ran down my spine. You think he's in danger? I think everyone connected to those files is in danger, Mrs. Golding, including you. The weight of his words settled over the room like a shroud. Morgan appeared in the doorway, his face uncertain. Ma'am, should my crew leave? Yes, Garrett said before I could answer. I'll need this to be an official scene. No unauthorized personnel. As Morgan and his crew filed out, I watched my peaceful Sunday morning transform into something from a nightmare. Federal investigation, missing partner, hidden files, danger, and underneath it all, the nagging question, who had Thomas really been? After Morgan left, Garrett spent 2 hours in the hidden room, photographing everything, making notes, occasionally asking questions I couldn't answer. Who were these people? When did Thomas compile these files? Did I recognize any of the names? I recognized 3. Lawrence Brennan, who'd served as mayor of Millbrook Falls 10 years ago. Rita Vance, principal of the high school where Dale taught, and Sheriff Raymond Cook, who'd recently retired after 30 years of service. All 3 had been friends, people we'd socialized with, shared meals with, celebrated holidays alongside. All 3 had files documenting secrets that could destroy them. Mom, you need to see this. Dale stood in the doorway of the hidden room, holding the leather journal we'd found in the safe. His hands trembled slightly. It's Dad's handwriting. It's a ledger. Garrett took the journal, flipped through pages filled with Thomas's precise script, dates, names, amounts, payments received, services rendered, the clinical language of transactions. Your father was running a protection service, Garrett said. Finally, people paid him to keep their secrets. Substantial amounts based on these figures. That's not possible, I whispered. But I was staring at entries dated across decades. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, all meticulously recorded. Michael snatched the journal from Garrett's hands, his face flushed with anger. This doesn't prove anything. These could be legitimate legal fees for cases that were never filed with the court. Garrett's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Golding, I've already cross-referenced some of these names with public records. Your father wasn't representing these people in legal matters. He was collecting money to keep quiet about information he'd gathered. Then, he was a criminal, Michael said flatly. Or he was protecting people, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. What if these weren't victims? What if they came to him, asked for help, and he managed the situation? Garrett studied me with new interest. An interesting perspective, Mrs. Golding. Is that what you believe? I didn't know what I believed anymore, but I knew Thomas. Knew the man who'd donated to the hospital fundraiser every year, who'd mentored young lawyers, who'd held me when my mother died and told me everything would be all right. That man couldn't have been a simple blackmailer, could he? I believe my husband was complicated, I said carefully. And I believe there's more to this story than we understand. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking. Some secrets should stay buried. I showed it to Garrett, watched his expression harden. When did you receive this? Just now. He pulled out his own phone, made a call. I need a trace on a number and a security detail at 428 Hawthorne Drive. Priority 1, security detail. The words made it real. We were in danger. Not theoretical future danger, but immediate present threat. Marshall, I said slowly, if someone knows we found this room, knows we're looking through these files, why warn us to stop? Why not just take what they want? Garrett finished. Because they don't know what you found yet. They're trying to scare you into walking away before you discover something specific. Discover what? Dale demanded. That's what we need to figure out. Garrett closed the journal carefully. Mrs. Golding, I'm going to need you and your sons to come to the federal building tomorrow morning. We'll need complete statements, and we need to secure these files before the sound of shattering glass cut him off. We all froze as a brick crashed through the living room window wrapped in paper. Garrett had his weapon drawn before the brick stopped rolling. Everyone down, away from the windows. Michael pushed me behind the sofa. Dale crouched beside us. Through the broken window, I heard an engine roar to life, tires squealing as a vehicle fled down Hawthorne Drive. Garrett spoke rapidly into his radio, calling for backup, issuing descriptions I couldn't process through the ringing in my ears. When he was satisfied the threat had passed, he retrieved the brick with gloved hands, unwrapped the paper carefully. What does it say? I asked. His face was grim. It's a list of names, 23 of them. He looked at me. Including your sons and you? The paper fluttered in his hand as he held it up. At the bottom, scrolled in red marker, everyone who knows pays the price. We're taking you into protective custody, Garrett said. All 3 of you right now. Wait. I stood, ignoring Michael's protests. I need something from the hidden room first. Mrs. Golding. 1 minute, please. Garrett hesitated, then nodded. Make it fast. I walked into Thomas's gutted office, into that secret room that had upended everything I thought I knew. The files lined the walls. So many lives documented. So many secrets preserved. But I wasn't looking at the files. I was looking at the VHS tapes. The dates on them spanned decades. But one caught my eye. September 15, 1987. The day we'd moved into this house. The day Thomas had insisted on setting up his office first before even unpacking the kitchen. The day he'd worked late into the night alone building this room. I grabbed 3 tapes. That one and 2 others dated around significant events in our marriage. Events where Thomas had been distant, preoccupied, secretive. Mom, we need to go, Michael called from the hallway. I slipped the tapes into my cardigan pockets and returned to find my sons being ushered toward the door by federal agents who'd arrived with remarkable speed. As I stepped out into the cool September afternoon, I looked back at my house. The home where I'd raised my children, where I'd built a life with the man I thought I knew. Someone had threatened my family. Someone wanted these secrets to stay buried badly enough to hurl a brick through my window. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed I would run, would hide, would let federal agents take over while I trembled in fear. They didn't know that I'd spent 40 years married to a man who kept secrets. I'd learned a few things about patience, about observation, about waiting for the right moment to act. And I'd learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The 63-year-old widow, the grieving wife, the confused, helpless woman who needed protection. Let them think that. Let them believe I was fragile, overwhelmed, out of my depth. While they watched the shield, they wouldn't see the sword. I climbed into the back of the federal vehicle, the VHS tapes heavy in my pockets, and began to plan. The federal safe house was a nondescript ranch in Fairfax County, 40 minutes. From Millbrook Falls, beige siding, brown shutters, a lawn that needed mowing, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. Perfect camouflage for people who needed to disappear. "You'll stay here until we assess the threat level," Garrett explained, as he ushered us inside. The interior was as generic as the exterior. Standard government tissue furniture, bare walls, the faint smell of industrial cleaner. "We've got agents posted outside. No one gets in or out without authorization." Michael immediately began making calls to his office, his wife, anyone who would listen to his complaints about the disruption to his schedule. Dale sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, his face still pale from shock. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out the VHS tapes. 3 cassettes, 3 different eras of our marriage, but no way to watch them. I doubted the safe house came equipped with a VCR. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Mom?" Dale's voice, uncertain. "You okay?" I slipped the tapes back into my pockets and opened the door. "I'm fine, sweetheart." He studied me with concern that made my heart ache. Of my 2 sons, Dale had always been the more perceptive, the one who noticed when something was wrong. "This is insane. All of it. Dad couldn't have been what they're saying he was." "I know." I squeezed his hand. "But we need to understand what really happened before we can defend him. The files, Mom, all those people. What if they're coming after us because he stopped, struggled with the words? What if Dad hurt people? What if he ruined lives?" It was the question I'd been avoiding. Then we deal with the truth, whatever it is. But even as I said it, doubt noted at me. Thomas had been many things, but cruel, destructive. I couldn't reconcile that with the man who'd read bedtime stories to our sons, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work. Unless I'd never really known him at all. That evening, while Michael argued with Claire over the phone in the bedroom, and Dale dozed on the couch, I noticed something odd. The agent posted by the front door, a young woman named Torres, kept checking her phone, not casually, anxiously, and when Garrett stepped outside to take a call, I saw Torres follow him. Through the window, I watched them have a heated conversation. Garrett's body language was aggressive, territorial. Torres looked defensive. They were arguing about us, about the case. When Garrett returned, his expression was carefully neutral, but I'd spent 40 years reading people's faces at dinner parties and client meetings. Something had changed. "Mrs. Golding, I need to ask you some questions about your husband's partnership with Edward Hutchkins." He sat across from me at the kitchen table, pulled out his notebook. "How much did you know about their business arrangement?" I knew they were partners, equal shares in the firm. Thomas handled most of the trial work. Edward managed estates and contracts. "Did you know Edward was married before? That his first wife died in a car accident in 1995? The question seemed to come from nowhere. Yes, I knew it was tragic. She was only 32. Garrett's pen still on the page. "Did your husband ever mention anything unusual about that accident?" A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking if Thomas ever suggested the accident might not have been." He chose his words carefully. "Accidental? Absolutely not." But even as I said it, I remembered something. A conversation years ago, after a firm dinner. Thomas and I driving home and him saying something odd about Edward. "He's trapped now. No way out." I'd assumed he meant trapped by grief, by loss. What if he'd meant something else entirely? "Marshall Garrett," I said slowly, "what did you find in those files about Edward's wife?" He closed the notebook. "That's part of an ongoing investigation. I can't." "You think my husband knew something about her death? You think he used it to control Edward?" The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind with terrible clarity. All these years, Edward wasn't just Thomas's partner. He was what? Another victim? Another person Thomas had leverage over. I think your husband was very good at collecting insurance policies, Garrett said quietly. Information he could use if he ever needed leverage. And I think Edward Hutchkins finally decided he'd had enough. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Ask Garrett about his brother. I showed him the screen. Watched the color drain from his face. Who sent this? His voice was tight. The same number as before. What does it mean? What about your brother? Garrett stood abruptly, walked to the window. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. My brother committed suicide 8 years ago. He was a banker in Richmond. Got caught up in some kind of financial scandal. Lost everything. He turned to face me. Your husband's firm handled the investigation. The implications hung in the air between us. You think Thomas? I think my brother's name was in one of those files, Garrett said. And I think whatever information your husband had drove James to put a gun in his mouth. The room tilted. This wasn't just about investigating Thomas's crimes. This was personal. Garrett had a stake in whatever we uncovered. Does your supervisor know? I asked carefully. Know what? That I requested this assignment? That I've been waiting 8 years to find out what your husband knew about my brother's death? His laugh was bitter. I'm the best person for this case, Mrs. Golding, because I understand exactly what kind of man Thomas Golding was. Then, you're compromised. Michael stood in the hallway, his face hard. You can't investigate objectively. You need to remove yourself. I need to find Edward Hutchkins before he disappears with evidence that could answer 8 years of questions. Garrett shot back. And I need to figure out who else wants those files badly enough to threaten your family. So, unless you want to file a formal complaint and wait for a new team to get up to speed, which could take weeks, I suggest we continue working together. Michael looked at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. The lawyer's assessment of risk versus reward. We continue, I said quietly. But Marshal Garrett, you need to be honest with us. All of us. No more secrets. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then here's the truth. We found something else in the files. A list of dates and locations, meeting spots, we think, where your husband collected payments. The last entry is dated 3 weeks before he died. The location is the old Riverside Mill out past Route 29. That's abandoned, Dale said. Has been for years. Exactly. Private. No witnesses. Garrett pulled out his phone, showed us a photograph. We sent a team there this afternoon. Found this in the main building. The image showed a room set up like an office, desk, filing cabinet, laptop, computer, but everything was destroyed. Paper scattered, drawers ripped out. The laptop smashed. Someone got there first. I breathed. 2 days ago by the look of it, right around the time Edward Hutchkins disappeared. Garrett swiped to another photo. We also found this. A message spray painted on the wall in red. The doctor knows. What doctor? Michael demanded. That's what we need to find out. Garrett's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, his voice dropping to a murmur. I pulled out my own phone, opened the text message again, asked Garrett about his brother. Someone wanted me to know the marshal was compromised. Someone wanted to create distrust, division. But why? Unless they needed us fighting among ourselves instead of looking too closely at the evidence. I stood, walked to the kitchen window. The safe house backed onto a wooded area, dark now as evening settled in. Movement caught my eye. A figure just at the treeing, too far to make out details, but standing there watching. Marshal, I called quietly. We have company. Garrett was at my side in seconds. Weapon drawn. He radioed Torres. Perimeter breach. Northeast corner. Move in, but don't engage until the lights went out. Complete darkness. Michael swore. Dale called for me. Garrett was shouting orders into his radio. And then I heard it. The soft click of the back door opening. Someone was inside. Everyone down. Garrett's voice cut through the chaos. Federal agents? Identify yourself? Silence. Then footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, crossing the kitchen tile. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding. And when my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, wearing one of the marshal's jackets and holding Torres's access badge, as if he belonged there. A man in his 60s, well-dressed, familiar. It took me a moment to place him because he was so utterly out of context. Dr. Richard Brennan, our family physician for 20 years. Hello, Constance, he said calmly, as if he'd just arrived for Sunday dinner. I think it's time we talked about what your husband really knew. Garrett's gun was trained on him. Don't move. Hands where I can see them. Doctor. Brennan raised his hand slowly, but his expression remained placid. Marshall Garrett, I wondered when we'd meet. Your brother spoke of you often before the end. Garrett's hand trembled. You knew James. I was his doctor. Treated his depression after the scandal. Prescribed the pills he used to, well, you know the rest. Brennan's smile was terrible. Thomas documented all of it. Every prescription, every session, every moment of your brother's decline. He kept excellent records. You son of a— Garrett lunged forward, but Michael grabbed him, held him back. Easy, Marshall, Brennan said. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because Constance needs to understand something important. He looked directly at me. Your husband didn't start collecting secrets because he was greedy or cruel. He started because he was protecting someone. And when he died, that protection ended. Protecting who? I demanded you, Constance. Everything Thomas did, every file, every secret, every terrible choice. He did it to protect you. The words made no sense. Protect me from what? Brennan's expression softened with something like pity. From the truth about your past, about who you really are. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. What are you talking about? Your maiden name was Constance Elizabeth Bradford, correct? Grew up in Charlottesville, only child of Robert and Eleanor Bradford. Yes, I whispered, though suddenly I wasn't sure of anything. Except that's not true, any of it. Brennan pulled a folder from his jacket. I recognized it instantly as one of Thomas's files. Thomas spent 30 years keeping this hidden, but now that he's gone, the people who wanted it buried have come looking, and they will hurt anyone who stands in their way. He tossed the file onto the kitchen table. In the flashlight beam, I saw my name on the tab. My file. Thomas had kept a file on me. Open it, Brennan said. Before anyone else dies, you need to know what your husband gave up everything to protect. My hands shook as I reached for the folder. Michael and Dale crowded close. Garrett kept his weapon trained on Brennan, but his eyes were on the file too. I opened it. The first document was a birth certificate. Not mine. I'd seen mine hundreds of times. This one listed a different name. Margot Hines, born June 3, 1962 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My birthday. My birth date, but not my name. I don't understand. I breathed. Keep reading, Brennan said softly. Newspaper clippings dated 1968. A house fire in Pittsburgh. 2 deaths. Robert and Diane Keller. 1 survivor, their 6-year-old daughter Margot. Photographs of a little girl with dark hair and solemn eyes. She looked familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. She looked like me. No, I said it's a mistake. My parents were Robert and Eleanor Bradford. I grew up in Charlottesville. I remember. You remember what you were told to remember? Brennan interrupted. What the Bradfords raised you to believe. They adopted you after the fire. Constance changed your name, your history, your entire identity. And they did it because someone very powerful wanted you to disappear. Who? Dale demanded. Why would anyone, because of what your mother witnessed the night of that fire? Brennan's voice was grim. Because she saw who said it, because at 6 years old, Constance or Margot was the only witness to a double murder. The room spun. I gripped the table edge, fought to breathe. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be true. But the photographs, the birth certificate, the dates that lined up perfectly with my life, reimagined as someone else's story. Thomas found out, I whispered. Somehow he discovered who I really was. When you were engaged, Brennan confirmed he was doing background research for the wedding announcement. Found a discrepancy in your adoption records. Started digging. And what he found? He shook his head. The people who killed your birth parents, who wanted you silenced, they were connected, powerful. Thomas realized that if anyone discovered you were still alive, still a potential witness, they'd come after her. Michael finished, his voice hollow. So, he built a protection racket, Garrett said slowly. Collected secrets, created leverage, made himself untouchable, all to keep people from looking too closely at his wife's past. For 40 years, Brennan confirmed he blackmailed, manipulated, and destroyed lives, all to keep Constance safe. And it worked until Edward Hutchkins realized what the files really were. Until he understood that with Thomas gone, there was no one to maintain the balance, no one to keep the predators at bay. That's why he ran. I breathed. He knew they'd come looking. And they have. Brennan's expression turned urgent. Constance, the person who set that fire, who killed your parents, they're still alive, still powerful, and they know you found the files. They know you're looking for answers. Who is it? I demanded. Tell me who I'm afraid of. I can't. Thomas never told me the name. It was his final insurance policy. But it's someone in this town, someone you know, someone who's been watching you for 40 years, waiting to see if you'd ever remember. The lights flickered back on. Torres stumbled through the back door, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Breach. Someone hit me. More agents poured in, weapons drawn. In the confusion, I saw Brennan move toward the door. Wait. I grabbed his arm. The files, do they say who? Thomas hid the final answer somewhere only you would find it, Brennan said urgently. He told me once if anything happened to him that you'd figure it out, that you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. Then he was gone, melting into the chaos as agents secured the safe house. I stood there holding a file that proved my entire life was a lie. That the parents I'd mourned, the childhood I remembered, the person I thought I was, none of it was real. I was Margot Hines, witness to a murder, target of a killer who'd waited 4 decades to finish the job. And somewhere in the evidence, Thomas had spent a lifetime collecting. Hidden in the secrets he'd protected, so fiercely was the answer to who wanted me dead. I just had to find it before they found me. They moved us to a new location before dawn, a hotel near the Federal Building. In Richmond, with agents stationed on our floor and in the lobby, Garrett had been replaced by a senior marshal named Patricia Cordova, a stern woman in her 50s, who made it clear she didn't appreciate the complications we'd brought to her jurisdiction. Dr. Brennan's disappearance is now part of the investigation. She informed us over coffee in her makeshift command center, a hotel suite converted into an operations hub. We've issued a warrant, but he seems to have vanished as thoroughly as Edward Hutchkins. They're working together, I said. It was the only explanation that made sense. Cordova's expression suggested she'd reached the same conclusion. What we need to understand is why. What's their endgame? I'd spent the sleepless night piecing together fragments of memory, testing them against this new reality. Margot Hines. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like trying on someone else's clothes. But there were moments, flashes of things I'd always attributed to childhood dreams that suddenly took on new meaning. A house with blue shutters, the smell of smoke, a woman's scream running through darkness while someone called a name that wasn't Constance. Moreau. They'd been calling for Margot. Mom, you need to rest. Dale sat beside me on the hotel room couch, his face creased with worry. You haven't slept. I can't. I showed him the file again. The birth certificate that proved I was someone else. Dale, if this is true, if I witnessed a murder, I might remember something. Something that could identify who did it, or you might be traumatized all over again, he said gently. Let the professionals handle this. But the professionals had let Dr. Brennan walk into a federal safe house and walk back out. They'd lost Edward Hutchkins and $2.3 million. They were searching for answers in Thomas's files while the real answer was locked somewhere in my fractured memory. Michael paced by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He'd been on calls all morning to Claire to his office to the family attorney. When he finally hung up, his expression was grim. We have a problem, a big one. Cordova looked up from her laptop. What kind of problem? Claire's father is Lawrence Brennan, the former mayor. The one who has a file in Dad's collection. Michael's jaw tightened. She just informed me that her family is filing a lawsuit against Mom for defamation and emotional distress. They're claiming Dad's files contain false information intended to damage her father's reputation. That's ridiculous. Dale said they can't sue Mom for something Dad did. They can, and they are. And Claire's standing with them. Michael's voice cracked slightly. She wants me to choose her family or mine. The betrayal in his eyes cut deeper than any physical wound. His wife, the woman he'd built a life with, was turning this investigation into a weapon against us. Lawrence Brennan, I said slowly, pulling the name from memory. He was mayor from 2008 to 2014. Thomas and I went to several functions at his house. He has a daughter about your age, Michael, and a son. Richard, Cordova finished, looking up from her computer. Dr. Richard Brennan, who just happens to be your family physician, and the person who broke into the safe house last night. The connections assembled themselves like a spider's web. Lawrence Brennan, compromised by whatever Thomas had discovered, his son, Richard, somehow involved in covering up the truth about my identity, both of them connected to a murder 40 years old. We need to see Lawrence Brennan's file, I said. Cordova shook her head. It's evidence in a federal investigation. I can't just. My family is being sued. My son's marriage is falling apart. Someone is trying to kill me. I stood, fought to keep my voice steady. I have a right to know what's in that file. After a long moment, Cordova pulled out her phone, made a call. 10 minutes later, an agent arrived with a copy of Lawrence Brennan's file.